In a dying world, a sentient little mushroom only wanted his spore back. But will he be able to keep his disguise from humanity? As you can see, we're gonna start to read Little Mushroom by Yi Shi Si Zhou. I'm gonna continue this series so you can subscribe and get the new chapters quickly. This translation was published by Peach Flower House. 7 Seas recently announced hardcover publication too. I have expressed my opinion and an introduction about the story in my Top 10 Danmei video. You can also check it out in the description. This is an award-winning sci-fi novel with 2 volumes, a very flavorful masterpiece. So, let's dig in!
Little Mushroom. Chapter 1. You're just a tiny little mushroom. The cave was dark and damp, with only weak fluorescence from the plants providing illumination. Tangled vines clung to the cliff face. Deep green, purple, and inky black. They resembled snakes tied into large knots. A black insect with 6 stiff wings and 3 proboscises barged into the cave, its flight path erratic. In the next second, a massive dark purple bulge suddenly appeared amidst the tangled vines and swiftly split open mouth-like, before snapping shut around the flying insect. The vines gradually began to wriggle, and the part that had bulged out retreated bit by bit until it returned to its original state. Within the cave was a sound like that of flapping wings. A drop of mucus, translucent strands trailing in its wake, fell from the ceiling and plopped onto the sticky moss below. The moss began to subtly squirm, and the drop of sparkling mucus vanished into the ground as it was rapidly absorbed. In a corner lit up by the fluorescence of green fungi, a tide of white poured forth from the crevices in the rocks and soil, blanketing a large area. Visit snow-white mycelium. It grew, spread out, and extended hundreds of millions of tendrils, then crept towards the center of the cave, gathered together, merged and elongated to form a figure. A single foot stepped upon the thick and delicately soft moss and sank down into it, leaving only a snow-white ankle visible. Ninja looked at his ankle. Though his human body was sustained by a skeleton, muscles, blood vessels, and had mobile joints, it was not flexible due to the human skeleton's limitations. Layers of keratin formed round and translucent fingernails. These were vestigial remnants originating from the sharp claws of beasts. He lifted a leg and took a step forward. The damp, springy moss pressed down by his foot gathered together again after he left, looking like earthworms standing erect. This time he stepped on something different. A skeletal human arm. In the darkness, Ninja looked at the skeleton. Fungi and vines had already taken root in the depths of its bones. Deep green vines wound around the hip and leg bones, while colorful small mushrooms resembling flowers in bloom grew upon the ribs. Fluorescent mushrooms emerged from its empty eye sockets and sparse teeth. The green glow they gave off was like fine shifting sand, very blurry in the misty cave. Ninja looked at it for a long time. At last he bent down and picked up a backpack made of animal skin that had been laying next to the skeleton. The contents of the backpack were unaffected by moisture. There were a few articles of clothing, human food and water, and a blue electronic chip half the size of a human palm that was engraved with a string of numbers. 32611705514. 3 days ago this skeleton was still a live human. 32611705514. The young human rasped brokenly as the weak green fluorescence illuminated the contours of his face. My ID number. This is my ID card. And only by having it can I go back to the human base. Ninja asked. Can I help you go back there? The human smiled, and the fingers of his right hand dropped to rest at his side. The chip tumbled from his hand and disappeared in the uneven moss. As he leaned back against the crags, he lifted his head and pressed his left hand to his chest, where a huge wound had opened up. Pale splinters of bone pierced through his chest, exiting from his back, and the surrounding skin had already festered. Part of it was pale gray, with cottony flesh covering the surface of the bone splinters, while the rest exhibited a blackish-green hue and released a continuous drip of dark liquid in time with the rhythm of his breathing. After taking a few breaths he said softly, I can't go back anymore, little mushroom. His shirt was dyed through. His skin looked pallid. His lips were chapped, and his body trembled at irregular intervals. Anja looked at him, unsure what to say. In the end, he only murmured this young human's name. Anse? You've just about learned the human language now. The human looked down at his own body. Apart from pus and blood, he was also covered with snow-white hyphae, which were part of Anja's body. The hyphae meandered along, adhering securely to the wounds on Nze's limbs and torso. The mushroom's original intent was to stanch the dying human's bleeding, but the hyphae also instinctively absorbed and digested the fresh blood that flowed out at the same time. You learned so many things just by eating my genes, huh? The pollution index here is indeed very high, the human said. Fragmented scraps of knowledge unfolded within Anja's mind. After a 5-second-long conversion, he understood that the pollution index referred to the speed at which genes transformed. Now human genes were flowing into his body along with Nze's blood. Perhaps, once I'm dead and you've completely eaten my body, you'll obtain a lot more things. Nze looked at the cave ceiling, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Then it seems that I will have done something meaningful as well. Although I don't know if it will be good or bad for you. Without saying anything, Anja moved his entire body towards Nze. He hugged Nze's shoulders with his newly grown human arm, and many hyphae flowed forth and piled up next to Nze to support his sagging body. The only sounds in the quiet cavern came from the dying human's gasping breaths. After a long time passed, Nze finally spoke up again. I'm someone whose life had no meaning. I don't have any outstanding qualities whatsoever. So it's very normal that they abandon me. In truth, I'm very happy to not go back to the human base. Just like the wilderness, they're both places where only people with value can live on. I've wanted to die for a long time already. I just didn't think I'd encounter a gentle creature like you before I died. Little mushroom. And you didn't really understand the meaning of those words such as value or die. He only caught that phrase once more. Human base. As he leaned against Nze's shoulder, he said, I wish to go to the human base. Why? Nze asked. Anja lifted his left arm slightly and made a gesture with his fingers, seeming as though he wanted to grab a bit of the air, but he grabbed nothing at all. It was just like his body. His body was empty. A massive void had formed in the innermost depths of his body. Impossible to fill and impossible to heal. And in its wake was an infinite hollowness and panic that clung to him day in and day out. Sorting out the words of the human language, he slowly said, I lost my spore. Spore. My seed. He didn't know how to explain. Every mushroom would have spores in its lifetime. Some would have countless spores while others would have just one. A spore was a mushroom's seed. It would grow out of the lamella, be dispersed by the wind to any random place within the jungle, take root wherever it landed, and turn into a new mushroom. Then this mushroom would also grow up little by little and have its own spores. Raising its spores to maturity was a mushroom's sole lifelong mission. But he had lost his only spore when it was far from maturing. Nze slowly turned his head, and Anja could hear his bones click like an old piece of human machinery when he did so. Don't go there. The human's raspy words sped up. You'll die. Anja recited that word once again. Die. Only humans can enter the human base. You won't be able to escape the judge's eyes. Nze coughed a few times, then drew a labored breath. Don't go, little mushroom. Confused, Anja said. The human abruptly grabbed Anja's hyphae with great force, and his harsh breathing became more hurried. Listen to me. After violently trembling and gasping for breath, Nze slowly closed his eyes. In a very soft voice he said, You don't have any attack power or means of defending yourself. You're just a tiny little mushroom. Sometimes, Anja deeply regretted telling Nze about wanting to go to the human base. If he hadn't told Nze wouldn't have spent his final moments on deterring him. Perhaps he could have listened to Nze tell a story. Or perhaps he could have taken Nze away from this dark cave for one last look at the fluctuating aurora in the sky. But Nze's eyes would never open again. The brief memory disappeared into the air just like how Nze's life suddenly disappeared from this world. In front of Anja, there remained only a snow-white skeleton. But he had to go against Nze's wishes regardless. He slowly uncurled the fingers of one hand. A brassy cylindrical bullet shell made of metal quietly lay upon the delicate skin and pale lines of his palm. It was very heavy, and there were some incomprehensible but definitely unusual grooves on its surface. He had found it at the place where he lost his spore, and ever since then, he hadn't let go of it. Supposing there was still a 1 in 10,000 chance that he could get his spore back, then this 1 in 10,000 chance lay with the bullet shell, a human creation. With a soft sigh, he put the bullet shell in the animal skin backpack Nze left behind, then bent down and picked up the clothes that Nze had once worn. A light gray long-sleeved shirt stained with blood, hardened black overalls, and black leather boots. After doing all of those things, he walked towards the cave exit. As he walked, the slightly baggy clothes rubbed against his skin, and tiny electric currents traveled from the nerve endings hidden beneath the skin to his core. And Zhou, who taken human form for the first time, was unused to it, and he frowned as he rolled up the loose shirt sleeves. The vines that had accumulated along the long and winding cave's walls jostled each other, but when Nze passed through, they receded like the tide and settled on the cave ceiling. 3 turns later, a moisture-laden wind blew in. The mushroom pushed aside the withered vines dangling in front of the cave mouth, and vast swaths of mushrooms, his kindred, stretched out as far as the eye could see. They seemed to extend up to the sky, and everything was quiet, with not a sound to be heard. Dim daylight shone in from between the cover of the mushroom caps, and the gray sky twinkled, a lustrous volatile green, and just smelled rainwater, fog, snake slough, and decaying plants. It was still evening. He sat down beneath the cap of the light gray mushroom nearest to the cave entrance and took out a yellowed map from his backpack. The map was covered with blocks of color that varied in shade, which indicated the degree of danger in the different areas. Nze had once pointed out to Nze the approximate location of the cave they were in. It was the darkest part of the entire map, which meant that it was a region that boasted 6-star danger level and pollution levels, and it was named Abyss. On the map, the area containing the abyss had also been marked with many strange symbols, so Nze checked them one by one against the legend in the lower right corner. The marks meant that within the abyss were scattered dense growths of mushrooms, cannibal vines, cannibal shrubs, simple mammalian monsters, hybrid mammalian monsters, common reptilian monsters, poisonous reptilian monsters, winged monsters, amphibious monsters, hybrid polymorphic monsters, humanoid monsters, and so on. At the same time, within the abyss, here were also geographic features such as canyons, hills, mountains, abandoned human cities, and the remnants of roads. The top of the map corresponded to north, and his gaze traveled all the way up. On the upper right of this colorful map, there was a pure white area marked with a bright red star, and the area's name was written to the right of the star, Northern Base. The green lights in the sky intensified, and the color behind it darkened little by little into pitch blackness. At midnight, Nze managed with difficulty to recognize the stars in the sky. He knew the brightest one was called Polaris and could be used to navigate by. So he pointed the upwards-facing arrow on the map's upper left corner towards Polaris and walked out over decaying wood, fallen leaves, hyphae, and saw one step at a time. Although it was nighttime, it wasn't dark. In the sky, those shifting green lights, humans called them the aurora, illuminated everything up ahead, and all you could see was mushrooms. Yellow ones, red ones, brown ones, all with massive caps. Small ones that clumped thickly together on the mountain rocks. Round puffballs that lay scattered on the ground and would, after maturing, release fog-like clouds of spores. Upon landing, these spores would split open upon the damp fallen leaves and soil and grow into spherical puffballs just like their mother. There were also mushrooms with no caps, consisting of only white or yellow stems that were either grouped together or radially separated. These swayed in the wind like seaweed. But this was not a world of only mushrooms. Vines, mosses, shrubs, cannibal flowers, and twisted trees quietly concealed themselves in the night. In the jungle of plants, dark shadows and strange shapes, either animals or fusions of humans and animals, ran, howled, and fought. Animals fought against animals. Animals fought against plants, and plants fought against plants. High and low, pitched howls beat against Nze's eardrums, and the rocks and soil were mixed with fresh bloodstains of various colors. He witnessed a pine tree bend down its trunk to devour a long snake with jet black scales and 2 tails. He also saw a massive toad extend and curl its bright red tongue around a flying bat that had human arms growing out of its back. 5 minutes after swallowing the bat, a pair of black wings grew out of the toad's bumpy and slimy back, soft and furled. This was only 1 out of 10,000 sights the mushroom had seen, and he had long ago become used to them. Right at that moment, a gray animal with 4 eyes and a body covered with scales, feathers, and fur walked over. Its head resembled both a crocodile's and a massive wolf's, and 7 teeth protruded from between its lips. Approached Injo and sniffed him with its blood-red nose. Unmoving, Injo quietly stayed next to a mushroom and breathed evenly until he had been sniffed all over. The huge monster, seeming to have gained nothing, turned around and lumbered off. Injo realized that nothing would notice him even if he was using a human form, perhaps because mushrooms could be found all over the place here. Lacked nutritional value, weren't aggressive, and sometimes even contained toxins. So he and they seemed to be creatures from 2 different worlds, peacefully coexisting. Perhaps Nze had been correct. He was a tiny little mushroom.
End of the chapter.
Oh well. It was such a good read, wonderful writing. The writer's world-building ability is cherry on top. When we talk about the story's setting, that's more dangerously beautiful. Do you agree with me? When we talk about Injo, we can say the same. It's all about perspective. What's your perspective on this? What makes something dangerous and terrifying, and what makes something gentle and pure? Then Nze, I feel so hopeless and makes my heart scratch from a tiny needle. The way he described human base and his own self makes me consider it is not just about this fantasy world. It's a universal thing. It is so amazing how one single chapter gives all these ideas. Wow. I have more to say, but I think let's stop here. Let's discuss more in the next chapter. Bye-bye.